Turner was still playing the organ for Mrs. Cobb on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, and hoping that Lizzie would come. He and Mrs. Cobb waited together by the back door for her. Usually she wasn't there, but every now and again she'd run across the backyard and up the stairs, and Mrs. Cobb would sniff and say something about being kept waiting for the only pleasure she had left to her. Then they'd process down the hall and into the parlor, and Mrs. Cobb would sit in her chair, Turner at the stool, and Lizzie on the floor against the horsehair chair, and Turner would begin. Mrs. Cobb had taken to swell the anthem Raise the Song, and since it had nothing in it about dying, Turner played it almost every time, all 6 verses. And Mrs. Cobb would sing along, all 6 verses. Her silvery voice, dry with gray age, warbled a bit and missed more high notes than it hit. But Turner simply played more loudly to help her out. She never failed to remind Turner that he was to listen for her last words, and that the paper and pen were atop the organ. She was ready to go whenever the good Lord called her, she said, and so Turner, and Lizzie too if she was there, had best be prepared for the worst. Any day, any hour, any moment. Turner tried to look resolute whenever she said this. Lizzie mostly looked panicked, which pleased Mrs. Cobb to no end. She would cough through the playing to remind them of the potential of the moment and shake her head at the frailty of human flesh. As October turned whiter and colder, Mrs. Cobb turned whiter and colder too. Walking from the back door to the parlor was more a shuffle and less a spurt, and her singing grew more and more patchy, a line here and a line there, but never a full verse anymore. Her hands lay on top of the armrests as if they needed a place to sit after a lifetime of clenching, and in fact, she seemed to be settling into stillness, quietly and crankily. The last Sunday in October, she waited in the parlor for Lizzie, too shaky to stand in the cold. She said nothing when Lizzie and Turner came in. She did not pick up the afghan that had fallen from her knees. Turner wondered if she might even fall asleep, so he played soft and low. "Are hymns always so slow?" she asked after the third one. Turner looked back. "Not always. And so soft? Good Lord, if you're going to play the hymn, Turner Buckminster, play the hymn." So he played more quickly and more loudly, Lizzie grinning the whole time, until Mrs. Cobb told him that he was playing too quickly and too loudly. "You'd think a minister's son would know how to play a hymn with reverence. Wouldn't you think so, girl?" "Yes, ma'am, I surely would," Lizzie said, and then put her hand to her mouth, startled. Turner wheeled about on the organ stool. "She does talk," said Mrs. Cobb. Lizzie stared at her. "All these days and never said a word." "I guess I never did have one to say," said Lizzie. And Mrs. Cobb, cranky Mrs. Cobb, leaned forward and laid her hands against Lizzie's cheeks and held them there, lightly trembling. "Oh, my land," she said quietly, "I had too many, but never the right ones for you. Oh, oh!" And suddenly, quickly, she lay back against the chair.